Started. Thank you everyone for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And also special thanks to CY2 and everyone on the team, especially Ernst, for inviting me to present. It's a great event and I'm excited to be part of it. Today's presentation is called Life Hacks for PeopleSoft. And let me just check the chat here before I go ahead. Okay, everybody's doing good. Yeah, it's called Life Hacks for PeopleSoft, and I will be talking about a few different things today, and we'll get into that in a minute. Quick introduction about me. My name is Sashank Vemana. I have been part of the higher ed community, so some of you may know me from there, as well as potentially some other forums like Quest or other Oracle forums as well, and potentially run into my blog as well in the past. And I recently started a company called Rank One Solutions, and it's aimed at helping clients, customers try to make the most out of their PeopleSoft investments. And I help them with consulting, or even in some cases build some products that might help them along the journey, and also looking into doing some training in some niche areas where unexplored areas as well, where there's not much of content beyond just the boilerplate documentation. Another thing I want to quickly mention is I'm also presenting about Kibana this afternoon later, and so definitely check out that session if you're interested in Kibana, not just specific to campus solutions. Yes, I am tailoring it towards campus, but you will learn something even if you're not using campus. So you can go here and register as well, or find me on the CY2 website. So today I'm going to talk about a bunch of different things which I ran into while working on a PeopleSoft project, and some of the gaps that I found with technology that exists with the multi-language support, and also how I use some of the frameworks that's available in People Tools, like personalization framework, event mapping, and things like that. So you don't necessarily have to have used multi-language support to get something out of this presentation. You will learn something about SSO, personalization framework, and event mapping, like I said. So this is just not heavy on slides. I'm going to be doing a lot of demos, right? So the first thing, this is a HCM installation I have here. It's a demo install, and I have a couple of languages installed here, and that's English and French, right? I am not going to go into a lot of the details related to language support in PeopleSoft. It's a fairly robust framework that's available, and a lot can be done, a lot of details in the install, as well as configuration and things like that. But I'm just going to focus on the end user experience and how I ran into this. And also, this is the first time that I worked on a client which has multi-language. I've done a lot of SSO implementations and other things before, but this is the first time I've actually run into an SSO implementation with language support. So some of the challenges that I ran into along that, right? And so this is the thing here where you have to select your language when you log in, right? And also PeopleSoft on the login page has got some config. What it does is, if you go into settings, go into advanced, and look at the languages here. So PeopleSoft would default your browser language on the page based on the language support that we've selected at the browser level, right? So that's a good feature. So the user does not necessarily have to go in and keep doing this every single time. And for instance, let's say I go in here and say, okay, I want to move French up to the top, and just refresh this. Hopefully that stayed. And if I go back and refresh this page, you can see that PeopleSoft has got code on the login page that would default it to French. So if I log in now, it would take me in as French, and it will always keep that defaulting to French. So you can see that it's logged in as French, right? So that's one of the features. So let me go back here, reset this real quick. Again, sorry about the noise. Hopefully this will get better now. Some delivery going on at the house. Move down. So now I have English, and that's it. So I'm going to refresh this and log in. So that's the basic functionality, right? And okay, so let's say I log in now. I log in English. what do I do from there? If I'm a user, if I want to change, of course, I have to log out and log back in different language. It is not something that's persistent, it's session-based, and nothing wrong with that. That's the way most language support works, because it tries to leverage what we set up at the browser level, right? So, but while I was working on this, I also found that if I go into People Tools, Utilities, International, go into Preferences, there's actually a page they built out that you can use to flip back and forth your language for the browser, right? So if I change this, now I'm in French, right? So I can go back and refresh my page. I can see that it's now in French. You can see the title and everything is changed. So this is something that they built more for technical staff, I would say, or people who are testing. And obviously, your users are not going to have access to People Tools framework, most end users, right? So potentially you could provide access to this page, but that's one option, that if you want to change the session language. But this is something that's only persistence for the session. So what I mean is, if I say French here, it's not that it's going to persist this forever, right? It's going to default it to my language on the browser. Of course, the log, you see that when I log out, it's gone back to English, right? So that's another thing to notice, that it's not persistent. So so that's how it works: end user experience and overall functionality, right? And then here I am implementing SSO. And what is SSO? Single sign-on. And the way SSO works, or expectation from an end user point of view, is that you would log into an IDP, let's say Azure or anything. It can be Okta or whatever, right? And then from there, you log into your portal or the main application, and from there you would click on links and get into the application. You don't want to present your end user this page, right? You will never. But the expectation is user doesn't have to come back here and log in. The user experience wise, constant, having to remember passwords, and also not having to enter it also, right? Even if you remember it constantly over and over again. So that's a benefit of SSO, obviously, right? So, and I have a URL here. This is actually, so a SAML based URL. I don't have the full implementation in this demo instance, but let's say I go to this URL. Sorry, let me clear my cache so you guys know that I'm not here on the PeopleSoft page. Let's say I go back to Google or something, right? And now I have a PeopleSoft URL, and that is going to take me into the landing page, really, with the SAML response. So the expectation is the SAML response is all the user credentials, not credentials, but user information for PeopleSoft to know who I am and take me in, right? So if I click this, it's going to just validate the SAML response, and I'm going to go into the application directly. So now here I am, and so where is language support? I don't have language support, right? So this is a challenge I ran into, because I've bypassed this page. So there's no way for users to check what language they want to use for this page. So that's the problem, right? So what do I do? So we were looking at, okay, can the IDP provide that potentially? Yes, maybe they can provide that as a parameter or something. But again, it's dependent on how the portal or the IDP is determining the language, and whether it's session-based or whatever. And also, there's no choice to flip back and forth within the application as well, right? If you want to change something. So another option, of course, is to expose that delivered page potentially, but that's at a session level as well, so it's not persistent. So that's where enter personalization framework, right? So before I go into personalization framework, what will we do in these kind of scenarios? Any application we build, right? We build something in PeopleSoft, we can build anything we like. It's custom bolt-ons. We will build config pages that are metadata about the way the application behaves. You might create some config related to terms, setup related to that, right? That's good. We build that constantly. But we also potentially build personalization related pages for users, self-service pages, to tell users, okay, go in and set these values if you want the application to behave like this. So now you end up with a multitude of self-service personalization pages. for each bolt-on that you build. So you may want to kind of think about using the delivered framework, which is already has a personalization, which I think it is underutilized in my opinion. So let me see. Okay, so if I go into my preferences, PeopleSoft has built this page for us for personalizations, and all these things here that you see is actually driven by config. So you can add something if you like to add a particular config that's custom to you. You can add that here. So not really related to language support. I used it for language support, but you can build any, write any config and put it into this page just using config, and I'll show you how you do that. Then also you can potentially add additional tabs here and make it more specific to a custom requirement. So you can see HCM has done this with time and labor and global payroll and recruiting. So you have something for recruiting specifically. All this again is determined by config, right? So let me open a new window and show you how all this works. So my goal is I want to insert some config here. That way I have a personalization here so that our users can now go and select their language, and that will persist because I have a way to store it in the database as well. It actually stores it in a PeopleSoft table. So we don't have to build any custom tables, build any custom pages. We're just building config and then really using the framework for this saves us a lot of maintenance. So if I go into People Tools and Personalization, and go into personalization options, this is the way you control what you see in the personalizations, my preferences page. And so you will see multiple options here, right? And I'm going to go into the one that says People Tools, because that's the one we're seeing here for the most part. So let's say, okay, enhance cursor, right? There's that config. So let's look at that. Sorry about that. Okay, let me view all and search for enhanced cursor, right? So that's the config there. You set this up here and then go into the format tab, and you can define, again, for the enhanced cursor, it's a translate value. You have a yes no field, and so you can use that particular config now for whatever you want to do with your application, right? So now, and also they've delivered, let me go back to the search page here. They've also delivered a custom category where you can go and add your own potentially. So this is where I'm going to add something called language personalization. Okay, and okay, let me go into the definition and call this language personalization. An option is I'm going to use PS Internet Architecture and the general options category, right? I'm selecting the general options because I want it to show up here because it has some other language related stuff. So I think it's a good place for me to put it there. I'm not really customizing anything, so I'm okay with that, right? And then I put this, you need to select this as system, it's not locale based, and go into format. And here's where you would define what your field is, right here for the validation and everything. So I'm using the XLAT, which is the translate table, and then I built a field for language, mainly because I didn't want my translate to show all the languages. I only have 2 languages installed, right? So that's the reason why I created my own custom field. And now I can default which one I want as the default, right? So I'm saying use session language here, and I'm going to save this. That's pretty much all we need. Now, if I go and refresh, it doesn't show up yet. Why? Because we have some security also related to this. So not only does the framework exist, it also has a security layer to it, which you can use to control who to show this to as well. So there's more configuration options to this. So go into security, permissions, permission list, and I have a custom one that I built for my SAML project. So I will go here, and I don't know if you ever noticed this, there's actually a personalizations tab on the permission list, right? Here's where you would come in and select, okay, which particular category, and I created mine under custom, and I put it under PS Internet Architecture. And so I'll go here, and then it'll show you all the ones that you've configured, and you can say whether you want to allow it for the user or not. So you can save that here. Okay, doing good for time. And now if I refresh this page, I have access to that permission list, obviously. And so now if I refresh the page, right away, you see language support, language personalization showing up here as an option. So as easy as that, just a couple of config, you're able to now plug into the personalization framework and use this to store your own custom personalization. So I think that's a great feature. So now I can select whatever I want. Let's say I want to select French, right? And save this. Now, if I go to the database, I have a personalization on this custom table for PS. It stored this value for me, and now I have a persistent stored value for that user as well, right? And also, I don't know if you noticed, as soon as I selected French, it automatically changed the language, right? I obviously I have to customize that page to do this, but I used event mapping to do that instead of customizing the page. So what I did was on this page, as soon as something changes on the save event, I've configured some event mapping classes, app classes that would then read that value and automatically change the session for the user at that point in time. And also I did that at the session login as well. When someone logs in for the first time, I will check if they have a value on this. And based on that value that they've chosen as a personalization, I will use that language for them. So that's the end-to-end solution that I provided for this problem, right? And what else do I want to show you on the personalization? Really, that's all there is about the personalization framework. So we use that part. Now, let me actually show this in action. So now it's changes to French. Now if I go back to the home page, you can see that right away it is in French, right? You can see all the French text here. And now I can go back to my preferences and within the same session, change it to English and save as well. And it should automatically change to English. Right, and regardless of what I've selected at the browser level. So if I sign out now, if I sign back in, okay, I selected English, right? So if I say I want to go French, but I've personalized it as English, so it's still going to take me in as English. So the personalization takes precedence over the session level. But if there's no personalization, then the session level would take effect. So that's how I coded this. So that's the end-to-end about the personalization framework. But let's look at what I did with event mapping. So like I said, as I make changes to this, as I'm going and making edits to that value, you can see that right away this has changed to French, right? You can see here this text has changed already to French. How did I do this? I created an event mapping app class that is out here, right? Let me open up that package to show you. So this is what we would do. We would create, you guys are familiar with event mapping for the most part, I would imagine. It's a way to not customize a page, yet put your custom code in there, right? At a high level, if you're a functional person. But what we do is we define our events in an app class, and then we would configure that to fire on specific events, right? And historically, we've used this naming convention, if you want to call it that, is to have an app package name and then the component name that you're going to fire these events on. And then you'll have an app class name per event, right? That's one established naming convention, not necessary that you have to follow it, it's just a naming convention, right? I go in here, and now you can see the method that I would execute, really looking at, is that value that changed, did someone actually change that language personalization? And if it is that, then set the language to whatever the user chose. Now, how do you tie this to that particular page? So that's where the event mapping configuration comes into play. So I will go in to, okay, yeah, people tools, portal, and event mapping is really, let me change the language back. I'm not understanding French, obviously. Put it back to English. And go into people tools. portal related content service. So event mapping really uses related content service. And so you have to build out a service definition that refers to your app package, right? So you'll create a configuration that you will point to your app package with the package name and the path, and then the event application class. And then you can go in and configure, tie these to specific components, specific events within that component. Now, this is the page, the manage related content service page is where you would define that. You will go into the event mapping tab, and I've already defined this. You can see that fluid structure and content, my preferences, general settings, that's where that particular component exists. And you can see that I've used the save post change event, and I've tied my service definition to that. And I want it to fire once the actual delivered event fires. I want my event to fire, right? That's the whole logic behind this. And so now that I have this in place, this code, as you saw when I was changing the language back and forth, it would refresh immediately, the language. Now, what's new in 8.5.8? So when I was configuring this on my demo instance, I found this thing that was new with 8.5.8. I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but event mapping parameter, what is that? That's not something I've seen before. So I was looking into this, and in PeopleBooks, if you see, am I in the right one? Okay, yes, I am in the right one. So event mapping parameter. What is this? So optionally specify a string value to selectively invoke a specific block of code within the app class. This allows you to use a single app class in multiple configuration, separating each bit of functionality into separate blocks, right? So what that means is now you can use the same app class and pass parameters to it and conditionally execute certain code or not. So what they're saying is really you can potentially have one app class and then fire off different parts of the app class based on what parameter you pass here, right? So how do you do that? So historically, we have, for app classes, we manage or we implement this execute method, right? Everything is basically as part of this delivered application package, and you have to implement the execute method and put in your code in the execute method, right? Now there is a new execute method in town, really. So you would want to use this event execute method if you want to leverage that parameter, right? So let's see, I implement this method. Let's comment out this thing, right? Let's assume that I don't have this event. So, but I have written this other code here on the execute event execute, sorry. And now you can see you will get in a string value as a parameter into the app class, and then you can just say, okay, if it's 1, then fire save post change. If it's 2, then save whatever event, right? It doesn't have to be said. It's just what you determine that value is within your app class, what you want to do with that. So I'm saying here, if it's 1, then fire the save post. 1 represents save post change in my case, right? It can be anything. And then there's 2 for something else, pre-build, 3 for something else. What's the advantage with this? You don't have to keep creating multiple app classes. If you want to just localize all your code in one place, and also not having to create multiple service definitions for every event, right? That becomes a problem too, maintenance-wise, potentially, if you don't want the granularity in this case, right? So let me go back here. What I mean by that is, once you define this once, the service definition, you're done. You don't have to again build this guy ever again, or at least for that particular module that you're building, whatever that is, right? And as you can see that there's also a parameter here, event parameter. You want to include that as well in your service definition, and then you're done with the service definition configuration part. And then let's go back here and going to manage related content service, event mapping, and go back in here. Now I'm going to pass in the value 1, which represents the save post change in my case, and save this. And you should see the same behavior now when I change the language, it should automatically, by the way, I didn't have to refresh it, but I just did it out of habit. So if I save this now, it should fire my execute event execute method, and the code should still change the language, right? That's the expectation here. So you see that language is changed here. So it's working, the event, if I'm passing it. Now, if I change this to 2, I don't have code for this, right? It's not going to fire my event, hopefully. If I change this back to English, it should still stay as French. And if I save this, it hasn't changed my language because my code is not firing there. So that's a new feature in A5.8. I don't think I've seen anyone talk about this, or even Oracle present about this much. But it's a developer thing, really. But it could have implications. Now, yes, I want to leave you with this thought before we probably take some questions. Now, why did I think of presenting about this? Because we spoke about naming conventions earlier, right? Historically, nothing wrong with this. I'm not really advocating for one or the other. It's just a choice based on what scenarios you're in. But we will say, okay, this is the app package, this is the component, and this is the event, which is the event for that specific app class, right? Now, you may want to rethink that, because now we have a new way of doing this. So you may want to call this something more generic. That way, you could still call it save force and it's just fire, right? It's just a code, but you may want to rethink your strategy of naming conventions and how you want to maintain your code in the future if you want to leverage this parameter. So that's pretty much all I had. I really love this format because it makes you think, what can you cram in 30 minutes and kind of reduce your content. 1 hour, you can get away with a lot of things, a lot of errors, and there's more room for going off on tangents anyway.